Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. On Tuesdays, voters in Palmer will decide if they want a resort casino in their town. In August, the town signed a host community agreement with Mohegan Sun, and today we're going to be talking to opponents and proponents about what they think a casino could do to their town. 22 News did offer representatives from Mohegan Sun to be here today, but they turned us down. So joining us right now in support of a casino development, we have Paul Burns, Palmer Town Councilor and resident. We want to thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're down to the wire, if you can believe it. We've been talking about this for years, and on Tuesday's the vote.
It is. It's the end of a long, long campaign.
That's true. I want to talk to you because 22 News took a poll because we wanted to see how people sort of get the vibe of what people were thinking in town. We asked 400 people in Palmer if they would support a casino in town. We found 49% said yes, 40% said no, and 11% are undecided. I want to ask you, what do you think about those results, first of all? Is that any surprise to you?
It's not a real shock to me, no. I think, we knew all along that the margin would tighten as we move forward in the campaign. And I think that's typical for the kind of campaign that this has been and the kind of process we've had. Unlike any other community, Palmer's really studied the issue. So I think voters have gotten to really get a feel for it and understand what the impacts are, both positive and negative. And regardless, there are going to be people who simply don't support a casino on moral grounds. You're not going to get those votes ever. And that's fair. If you're not going to vote on it, you believe it's not a particularly great moral issue to vote on, they're not going to support it. But I think the other voters who are looking at what it can do for the community, how it impacts Palmer, and how it really impacts and improves the quality of life throughout town in terms of providing funding for education, funding for the community as a whole, and providing real opportunity and jobs. I think those folks are still going to support the casino. And I think also it's important for the proponents to realize that this is a close race and that we're going to have to get out and make sure that we get out there and vote to support, a strong future for the town of Palmer.
Do you think people have actually switched over to the no side? What did you think about where these numbers sit, 49% versus the 40%?
I don't think there's really been a huge swing to the no side. I mean, polling 3 or 4 years ago showed 35 to 38% opposed. So, we're at 40%. So that's not a huge change from even a couple of years ago. I think what happens is that very often people looked at the process that we'd gone through, and I think they expected more concrete results by the end. It's very difficult, unfortunately, to come up there with finalized plans for anything at this stage in the process. And I think simply because of the work we put into it, people have looked at it and said, well, geez, they're kind of wanting a little bit more, and it really can't be done right now because we have to rely on the state. We have to wait for final plans, and those can't come until after the concept itself is approved.
Are there any misconceptions that you think are out there right now that are, we're going to hear from someone on the no side who's very much against the casinos. What would you say to the people who are very much firmly against it? Are there any misconceptions that you would want to clear up?
Well, I know, we've heard some issues about eminent domain, which I think, really is not an issue in the process. Eminent domain is going to require a vote of the town council no matter what. We can create, there's a potential in the host community agreement to create a redevelopment authority on the site, but that site would be defined by the town council, by the planning board, and ultimately by the Department of Housing and Community Development. We'd have to determine what that site was. There would be no eminent domain on their part outside of the particular site we determined, and that would be the casino site. So that it's not possible for an entity like that to come into town and take land anywhere. It's going to be strictly defined on that site, and it's land they already have, so there isn't going to be any significant land taking.
Okay. While we were out talking to people and conducting this poll, they were concerned about the town getting, I was hearing from somebody that they were concerned about the town getting this money and not doing anything with it, just misappropriating funds. How do you think the town council will work when should this proposal pass, and should the gaming commission then choose Palmer? How would this work? How would the town council then work with Mohegan Sun to use these funds?
Well, it's not up to us working with Mohegan Sun in terms of the revenue that comes to our community. That's community revenue. It's going to be in part determined by the town manager, who will make recommendations, and the town council that will affirm those recommendations. But there's significant support on the council to do property tax reduction and to do education funding in particular. Those are just two of the things. You look around our community and we're struggling to find money to do anything with. Our parks are in pretty sad shape overall. We really need to go out there and find funding to do this, and that doesn't come you're not going to get a lot of funding from other sources in this day and age. You need a big development, and whether it's this or some other big development, you need that kind of development in your community to increase the tax base and be able to actually pay for these kinds of improvements. Our education funding has stayed pretty constant for the last well, 5 or 6 years, and we need to find a way to increase that. And I think this is one of those mechanisms where we can invest in our future, invest in our schools, and invest in our parks, but overall invest in the community.
So you think taxes and education are the 2 points that people might actually see a difference should this casino be picked?
Oh, I think they will see a difference.
Okay.
You know, I think one of the arguments that we have all the time, not arguments, one of the problems that we as a council have is that we know that we need to spend more money on education. We know that we have to find a way to fund that, and the money isn't there. I mean, the question really comes down to, you know, where do you take it from? Do you take it from police? Do you take it from parks? Do you take it from DPW? And those are the real challenges that we face in this day and age. You know, after what, 8 years of state funding cuts, you look at an ever decreasing pool of local aid, and we rely more and more on our tax base. Well, this is one way to massively increase the tax base and provide funding for the programs we need, while at the same time being able to provide significant property tax relief to homeowners in Palmer. We're not going to get a chance, again, to reduce taxes, whether it's 25, 35, or 40%. That opportunity is not going to come, you know, if we build a small mall or something up there.
Okay, another concern that I've heard from people out in the field is, you know, once this money does start to come in, how will it, I don't want to say how will it be appropriate. Let me switch over to another topic instead. The 11% undecided, how do you think those people are going to be persuaded in the next couple of days? Do you think that those people are actually going to get out and vote? Do you think that these are people who aren't going to vote? How do you see the 11% going in this?
It's hard to say for sure. Typically in a campaign like this with an issue that's well understood, very often at this point in the campaign when you're still at 11% undecided, an awful lot of them don't vote. Now that's not to say they won't show up. I don't know. I don't know who the 11% are and what's going to motivate them. But typically, at this point, either they're going to split pretty evenly or they're just not going to show up. Because, you know, there are valid arguments on both sides. If you're just sitting here listening and you haven't studied it, you're hearing both things. You know, I think the arguments obviously on the pro side are much stronger. I think we have to look at how we invest in our community. I think we have to look at how we grow a community like Palmer. And one of those ways is with significant commercial development. This is a huge development that is going to be a game changer for the community. There are certainly going to be costs, but I think those costs have been mitigated significantly. You know, one thing you look at just in the area of public safety. We're going to increase our police department by nearly 50% in size. We're going to have a full-time fire department for the first time in our history. We're going to increase by 50% the size of the Palmer Ambulance Service. Those are all significant improvements in public safety that don't cost the taxpayers of Palmer a dime.
How about some of the, a lot of people have said there's unanswered questions. They want to see a traffic proposal. They want to know exactly what's going to happen socially. Is it, you know, is it a high expectation, or is it appropriate for them to expect to see all of these little details in the host community agreement right now before they head to the polls? Is that something that you would typically know beforehand before going into a vote like this on Tuesday?
You know, no other community has, and we've got more information than any other community in the state. Excuse me, and I think that's a part of our problem, is that we've spent so much time studying this that there was an expectation that there would be concrete details in every area of it. And unfortunately for us, there can't be. The traffic plans have to be reviewed by the state. The traffic plans also, I mean, they have to see a proposal. We have to know the exact proposal. It has to be subject to site review by the planning department. And you can't have a final plan for traffic until all of that is done. You know, the simple thing is that they've agreed to mitigate it. I think we look at historically what's happened in Connecticut, and they don't have traffic jams. They don't want you not in the facility. They want you in the facility. We already know that we have significant traffic issues in town, and those aren't going away. If we don't put $40 million into our roads, they're never going to be improved. Here's an opportunity right now, today, not today, but in 18 months, to see significant investment in our infrastructure.
Okay. How important is it to you that this vote on Tuesday, should it wind up in Palmer's favor, you know, have the gap be larger than in Springfield? Is there sort of a campaign to try to beat the vote that, you know, MGM achieved in Springfield, just because the Gaming Commission will be looking at the two, or is the goal really just to pass this in your
Well, I mean,
opinion?
a win is a win no matter what. You know, certainly the bigger the margin, the happier you are. But I think, you know, when this comes right down to the end of it, again, we've spent so much more time studying it. I think the expectation is different in Palmer. In Springfield, they came in, they were over and done in what, 6 months, 9 months? So there wasn't an awful lot of time to understand the process. People got, it was kind of a new idea in Springfield. Let's, you know, let's go out there and let's pursue this. In Palmer, it's been much more concrete, and we've been much more involved in the details and discussions over the years. It hasn't been an all or nothing. I think, you know, right from the start, the proponents have admitted that there will be costs, and then we have to mitigate those costs.
Okay. Mohegan Sun was invited onto our program. They chose not to come. There must be events and, you know, different opportunities for people to come and get information for any of those people who are waiting until the last minute and would like this weekend, Monday, or even Tuesday to find out a little bit more information. What's going on in town that will allow people to get some of that information?
Well, I know there's at least one rally planned for the weekend. The town manager has held informational sessions on 3 nights during the month of October to provide information about the host community agreement. You know, various groups have had standouts and organizing. I know Mohegan Sun has done events at least 4 or 5 venues in the community. And
a lot of it is outlined online as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. There's a couple of websites online. Was it Vote Yes Palmer, and I think the Mohegan Sun website as well.
Okay, so you must be calling for those people who are in support of the casino to get out the vote now. Now that we've seen some of our numbers, how do these compare to the other numbers as well? Does this appear to be pretty on target from what you were?
Well, there's been no public poll for almost 2 years, so there is a slide from that. But you know, I think when you're doing this in a vacuum, you know, there really was no campaign. You know, it's like who's going to run against the Democrat or the Republican. It's a generic poll, and it's very much different when you're sitting there looking at concrete proposals. I do think that we'll see a margin around 55%, but I could be wrong.
Feeling confident that it will pass, though?
I think based upon the response that I've seen in public, and you know, when we do our standouts, I think I am feeling pretty confident that I think it's it's moving back in the more positive direction, I think.
Okay, Paul Burns, Palmer Town Councilor, thank you so much for coming on throughout this entire thing, and I'm sure we'll be speaking with you again in the future on the topic. Thank you so much. And we will talk to an opponent to the casino in Palmer after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about Tuesday's vote in Palmer to either approve or deny the host community agreement with Mohegan Sun for a proposed resort casino in that town. We have talked to a supporter of the casino development project. Joining me now is Michael EAGAN with QUABOAG Valley Against Casinos, also a resident in Palmer. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on.
It's important. We hear both sides of this issue just 2 days before the election, as this is airing on Sunday. So talk to us. I was talking to Paul about the poll that we conducted. 400 people, 49% said that they would support the casino, 40% said they would not, and 11% still undecided. You can analyze that all day long, but what are your reactions to that poll?
My reaction is we have a saying at our campaign, the more you know about casinos, the less likely you are to want one in your community. And I think as time goes on, people are learning more and more about the negatives of a casino, and therefore they're switching to the no side. We actually have some advertisements that will be coming out in our local paper and the Springfield Republican, which has a lot more information. And again, the more people learn, the more they're going to want to vote no on the casino. Okay, so let's talk about this, because there are still, according to our poll, at least 11% undecided. People at home watching this, wondering what they think about it. They've heard Paul, who had, you know, he's always been in support of this casino and talked to us about the ins and outs. Talk to us about some of the research you've done that makes you concerned about a casino coming into town. Sure, thanks. The first issue I'd like to talk about is jobs, because that's the issue that the other side keeps pounding away. Mohegan Sun has promised 3,100 jobs, and we think that there's no way they can deliver on that kind of a promise. Let me go through some of the negatives in terms of how they're going to reach that number of hired people. First of all, in the host agreement, there is no guarantee for jobs to hire people locally. Another issue is this. We recently had somebody from our side go down to Mohegan Sun, and that individual talked to several employees down there, and the employees at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut said they're getting ready to go to Palmer because that's where the jobs are. Now let me explain this a little bit further. Studies have shown that Mohegan Sun in Connecticut gets 1/3 of their business from Massachusetts residents. So that if you look forward, when there's 3 casinos open in Massachusetts, what will happen is 30% of the business down in Connecticut, they'll lose 30% of their business at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. which means they'll take those employees that are already trained in those jobs, casino jobs, and more than likely they'll move them to Palmer. So when you talk about the number of jobs that are going to be available, keep that in mind. A third of the business of Mohegan Sun will go down the tubes once those casinos in Massachusetts open. Other issues that I'd like to bring up in terms of hiring, Mohegan Sun in the last 3 years has laid off 650 employees. That's information from the Hartford Courant. Additionally, Mohegan Sun originally had over 10,000 employees, and that has dropped to 6,400. The 6,400, you subtract the 650 from that, and you're actually in a range of 5,800 employees is what they have. These are all factors in terms of people getting jobs. If you're talking about a company that's laying off people, how can you expect that they're going to be hiring extra people? It doesn't make sense. Additionally, Mohegan Sun has had a history of hiring people worldwide. They brought in people from all over the world to fill those low-paying jobs. My question is this: if the jobs are as high-paying as they claim they are, then why was it necessary for them to go all over the world to hire people? Why couldn't they have hired people from Connecticut, from Massachusetts, from New York? This is the Northeast. We are pretty densely populated. Obviously, something's wrong with that situation. I make note of the fact that Palmer Consultants, during the negotiations, said that the higher paying jobs would require extensive training because of the nature of the casino business. So anyone looking for a higher paying job, they're going to need extensive training. Mohegan Sun is not going to hire people who are not trained for these positions. Something else that we find very disturbing, Mohegan Sun is broadcasting, advertising that the average salary for a job is $41,000. We find that terribly misleading to the people of Palmer, because the average means that what they've done is they've taken the top executives, the CEOs, the people who make six-figure, seven-figure salaries, and they've averaged them with a chambermaid, and they've come up with this figure of $41K. It's absolutely ridiculous.
But let me ask you, I mean, for people who don't have a job right now, wouldn't you say a paycheck is a paycheck, though? I mean, for people who are sitting home still unemployed, $40,000 might go a long way in that family, wouldn't you say?
No, I'm not sure I understand. What we're saying is the $40,000 is misleading, because the average salary is much less. They've averaged in the CEO salary with a chambermaid.
Sure, but what we're saying is jobs, though, for people who can't find any jobs.
Sure.
Don't you think that that might be an opportunity?
Sure. Well, the actual salary, the average salary is below $20,000. Yes, I suppose that's better than nothing, but it's a very low salary, and it's not what they're talking about when they average $41,000.
Now, let me ask you, because I know that you're against casinos, and you've done a lot of research on Mohegan Sun. Have you done the same research on MGM to know what casino developer might be best in Western Massachusetts? Have you looked into MGM to see if, you know, between the two? Because
no, I have not focused on MGM. I live in Palmer. I'm a resident. I've studied hard the issue in Palmer. I have not looked at MGM.
Okay.
Also, in terms of jobs, people have to remember that internet gambling is just around the corner. And lastly, still on the subject of jobs, we have to consider the glut of casinos. There will be a glut in this area with the 3 Massachusetts casinos, the 2 in Connecticut, 1 in Rhode Island that was converted from a slot place to a full casino, and we'll have another slot parlor out near Boston. And Governor Cuomo in New York has suggested they build 7 more casinos. There's sure to be one in the Capital District or Albany area. So there's a glut of casinos. Why am I making this point? Let's see what happens when there's a glut of casinos. In Atlantic City, there originally were 13 casinos. They're down to 12 casinos. Out of that number, 8 have filed for formal bankruptcy proceedings. Can you believe that? 8 casinos filed for bankruptcy. Now it gets worse. The Revel Casino down in New Jersey was built and lasted a total of 10 months. Can you believe it? 10 months, and they filed for bankruptcy. This was a $2.5 billion project. And the kicker is this, another punchline. Governor Christie authorized $261 million be paid to that casino before they file for bankruptcy. So when you talk about state dollars, we're finding in the research we've done, there are states that are propping up the casinos. Delaware is another example.
So you're concerned about Mohegan Sun or any casino coming into town and then filing for bankruptcy because the market just doesn't support it right now? That's
Absolutely. These two casinos, Mohegan Sun is proposing a casino in Palmer. That's 56 miles away from the one they have in Connecticut. We think there's a glut. They've gotten us to the point where there'll be a casino within a radius of 50 miles of everybody in Massachusetts. Now think about this. If you can get to a casino in under an hour's time, there's no need to stay in a hotel. You can come out in an hour and drive home in an hour. Yet they're building a hotel because they think it's a destination resort. Well, they're not going to come from New York State because they're going to have all their casinos there. And they probably won't even come from Pittsfield. Pittsfield can go over to Albany as well. So we think that the market is saturated and the casino industry is a dying industry. Their revenues are down terribly. They're down 30 to 40%. They're getting killed by Aqueduct and Yonkers in New York, and they're fighting for their survival,
But
literally.
talking specifically to Palmer, though, because what people are trying to figure out at home is if they support a casino in Palmer, and eventually the Gaming Commission is going to look at Springfield or Palmer if Palmer passes this. So what people at home need to decide is if this is something that's better in Springfield or at home in Palmer. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because the law has already been passed that casinos are allowed and could come to the state. So now people are trying to understand which one is better between the two right now. And that's what this vote is on Tuesday, is if they would support it in Palmer or not. So have you looked to see which of the two would support in Massachusetts, if either?
Which of the two casinos? Sure. I don't support a casino in either location. Quite frankly, I think they're detrimental to the communities where they're located, and I'm not in favor of either casino.
What are some of the other issues that you have?
Other issues are traffic, okay? Consider this fact. Mohegan Sun takes great pride in the fact that they've been here for 5 years. Now, wouldn't you think after 5 years there would be a traffic plan? That's a long time. Nothing has changed. The roads in the mountain, everything is just the way it was 5 years ago. I called the, what's happened is this.
Well, I think what Paul was just saying, though, is that they were waiting to see what some of the regulations were, because a lot of the outlines, or a lot of the regulations haven't actually been outlined yet.
Exactly. This is what's happened. Mohegan Sun is...
So how could they do that, in other words?
Okay, what I'm saying is this process with traffic should have been started a long time ago, so they had a definitive answer way before the vote. I called the Department of Transportation. What's happened is this. Mohegan Sun has submitted 4 different plans to the Mass Department of Transportation. I called the DOT and said, will you folks have a final approval on a plan so that Palmer voters know what it is they're voting on? And they said, no, it won't come until after the vote because they're in the MEPA, or environmental phase study of the phase. So my point is this, that Mohegan Sun has been there for 5 years, should have submitted the plans a long time ago. So we have a plan.
We are down to 1 more minute, but what would you just say to those voters who are you know, just sort of tinkering on what they want to do? Because we just have less than a minute now.
Well, consider that this is, you know, so many reasons to vote against it. No money earmarked for schools in the host agreement, and yet they earmarked $500,000 to plant trees called Streetscape. All of the schools are within a distance of the casinos. That's a terrible thing. Palmer consultants advise the town to prepare for violent crime, domestic abuse, welfare, social services. Gambling is the fastest growing addiction among college students. There'll be an increase in drunk driving, bankruptcy. There'll be auto rates will go up because as crime hits your community, your auto rates will go up as well.
Thank you so much, Michael Egan. And I know some of this research can be found on the internet as well if people want to look into this a little further in your website as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus.